All right, so with that now, I think let's bring up Mike Hichborn. You guys all know Michael, Lepanto Institute. He was with us in June in D.C. Does great work. I think basically keeping everybody informed about some of the pitfalls that our bishops, our hierarchy can so easily fall into.
Thanks, Father. 13 years ago, my wife was driving my my 3 children at the time. My oldest son was 5 years old. His sister after him was only 4. And she was asking my wife, how many worlds are there? My wife was thinking in terms of astronomy. Well, you know, I'm teaching an astronomy class, you know, how many worlds, how many stars? And then my son pipes up and says, oh, there are 3. My wife kind of looks back and says, okay, I don't know where he's going with this, but I'll just let him answer. And my daughter says, oh yeah? Well, what are they? And my son said, well, there's this world, there's heaven, and the life in mom's tummy. And so he took a very simple concept and made it, or a very complicated concept, and made it very simple, that there really are 3 worlds. And that because there are 3 worlds, there are 3 births. There is a birth into this world. Well, there are 2 births. A birth into this world, and then a birth into the next. Now, what we are doing here today is talking about allowing children to be born into this world. And the reason that we want that is so that they can be born into the next. Yes. Now, in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of St. John, our Lord proclaimed the Eucharist and told his followers that unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will have no life within you. He repeated this 3 times. And his followers finally said, Lord, what you say is hard. It's hard. It's hard for us to believe this. We don't know how to believe this. But he did not mince words, and he did not back down. St. Paul tells us that to receive Holy Communion in a state of mortal sin, by not discerning the body and blood of our Lord, you call judgment upon yourself. Canon Law 915 says, those who are excommunicated or under interdict, or those who obstinately persevere in grave manifest sin, are to be denied Holy Communion. I will never forget the conversation that I had with Cardinal George back in 2009. I was just put in charge of the Canon 915 project at American Life League. And I sent out a survey to bishops across the country asking if they were going to enforce Canon 915. And I get a phone call from Rome, and it's Cardinal George. And he says, I understand you're taking a survey. And I was a little nervous, wondering if he was going to excommunicate me or something. And I said, well, it's more trying to gather information and figure out what's going on. Why is there such a diversity with regard to whether Canon 915 is enforced or not? And I'm trying to figure out which bishops are enforcing it and which ones aren't. And we had a brief conversation. He said, I'll tell you what, I'd love to continue this conversation. I said, great. So as soon as I got off the phone with him, I called his secretary and I said, I'd like to set up an appointment. Cardinal George said to. So I got the appointment. And I went to Chicago with my employer at the time, who was Judy Brown, one of the stalwart leaders of the pro-life movement. And in sitting there and talking to Cardinal George, he did nothing but lambaste her for 10 minutes. Just chewed her out. And finally, I raised my hand. I wasn't supposed to say anything, by the way, but I raised my hand and I said, Your Eminence, I'm not trying to interject. I'm just trying to understand the purpose that we are here is to talk about Canon 915. And he said, okay, yes, great, let's talk about it. I said, okay. So Canon 915 says, those who are excommunicated under interdict or obstinately persevering in grave manifest sin are to be denied Holy Communion. I said, and he said, that's right. People who are aware of mortal sin are not supposed to approach for communion. And I said, Your Eminence, that's not what Canon 915 is. That's Canon 916, which says that those who are aware of mortal sin are not to approach for Holy Communion. I said, that puts the onus on the individual. So Canon 915 puts the onus on the one distributing communion. He said, well, that's according to your own opinion. And I said, well, how else am I supposed to interpret it? And he said, I don't have to tell you that. I was shocked. I said, Your Eminence, I'm not trying to be belligerent, but as a member of the faithful who is very deeply confused about the interpretation of canon law, I am coming to you, a prince of the church, to help me to understand exactly how it's supposed to be enforced. His only answer was to change the subject and start talking about how maybe the USCCB could work with American Life League in putting forth pro-life initiatives. Let me tell you something. What most people don't know is that the USCCB, back then the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, launched the pro-life movement back in the 1970s. They were part of the move to launch the pro-life movement. But then things broke down in the late 70s when they would not take a position on contraception. They would not take a position on contraception. And that split the pro-life movement. That's why American Life League was started. So, through the course of Canon 915, and I'm going to come back to Canon 915, but through the course of the problem of pro-abortion politicians, what's wound up happening is that the origin of the pro-life movement, which some of them might remember, has come full circle and is now financing organizations that are promoting abortion and contraception. The Catholic Campaign for Human Development is regularly giving money to organizations that are pushing abortion. Just this morning, I put out an article about 3 of the CCHD's most favored networks of organizations: Faith in Action, the Gamaliel Foundation, and the Industrial Areas Foundation. Those 3 organizations regularly comprise about 30 CCHD grantees. Those 3 organizations are dues-paying members of an organization called the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. That organization is right now putting forward a program to fund abortion clinics. And those 3 networks that the CCHD loves, by the way, they put out tweets, they put out Facebook posts saying how much these groups are doing so many wonderful things for poor people. Yeah, you know how they're helping poor people? By eliminating the poor. So what is happening is that the organization that is refusing to enforce Canon 915 is doing so because they know their own guilt. And what the problem is that they have a hard saying. They don't want to enforce Canon 915. You know why? Because the politicians that are keeping their coffers filled are the ones that they're giving Christ to. They're the ones that are also murdering babies in the womb.
Right.
It is a shame. It's an absolute shame. But there is a solution. And that solution is found in the rosary. Our Lady promised that in the end, her Immaculate Heart would triumph. We don't know when or how that's going to happen, but what we do know is that we are called to witness, and we are called to pray, and we are called to sacrifice. Love is sacrificial. If you're not willing to suffer for love, you're not in love. You have to love truth, which means you suffer for truth. We're out here in the cold, not because we love the cold, but because we love babies and we love the truth. And so we are witnessing through our suffering for the salvation of souls and for the birth of preborn babies. God love you.
Thank you, Michael Hichborn, Lepanto Institute.